being in a social environment where not only was, something delicious being presented in front of me, and this goes into everything that we do now that I think about it.
Yeah.
The way I would feel during these experiences is what made me want to always, have the next version. And my mother was a fantastic cook. So it's not like, we went out to dinner because, we didn't eat at home. We ate at home as well. But, multiple times a week, my parents just loved going out to eat. And that really, stoked the flames in me of saying, this is a career path that I think would be really interesting.
Welcome to Behind the Stays, a podcast that shares the stories behind your favorite boutique hotels, short-term rentals, and hospitality brands, and the hosts, operators, and entrepreneurs who've brought them to life. Every Tuesday and Friday, you'll meet the military veterans, the retired flight attendants, the tech entrepreneurs, the school teachers, the single moms, the hoteliers, and real estate investors who are all, in their own unique ways, shaping the future of travel and hospitality. Discover how these visionaries from all over the world have built stunning landscape hotels in the mountains, designed bohemian bungalows on the beach, erected eclectic, off-grid, nature-immersed escapes, and so much more. Behind the Stays is brought to you by Journey, a first-of-its-kind loyalty program that brings together an alliance of the world's top independently owned and operated stays and allows travelers to earn points and perks on boutique hotels, vacation rentals, tree houses, ski chalets, glamping experiences, and so much more. And I'm your host, Zach Boozy Cruz, head of the Journey Alliance. All right, friends, without further ado, enjoy the show. In just a moment, we meet Bobby Quintal, a partner at Sandstone Hospitality. Some people enter hospitality by accident. Others are born into it, raised at tables where the meal was just the beginning of the experience. Bobby is one of those individuals. Hospitality isn't just a career for Bobby, it's a lifelong passion shaped by growing up in New Orleans, one of the most culturally rich and culinary-driven cities in the world. From his early days working in restaurants to leading development for Danny Meyer's Union Square Hospitality Group, one of the most highly regarded restaurant groups in the world, Bobby has spent his career crafting memorable spaces that blend food, design, and storytelling. Now, as a partner at Sandstone Hospitality, Bobby is helping redefine boutique hotels, breathing new life into historic properties like the Columns, building up brand new destinations like Hotel Henrietta, and weaving F&B-forward hospitality into every project. In this episode, we dive into how growing up in New Orleans shaped Bobby's view on hospitality. We discuss lessons from working with Danny Meyer and Union Square Hospitality Group and how legendary brands like Shake Shack built an empire by prioritizing emotion over transactions. We talk about reinventing the Columns Hotel, how Bobby and his team transformed a fading New Orleans institution into a must-visit experience. We talk about the delicate art of new builds versus historic renovations, why the best designers listen to the story a space already wants to tell instead of forcing a new narrative onto it. We talk about how Sandstone weaves F&B into every project creatively. We also talk about why smaller cities with soul are the next frontier of experiential hotels, and so much more. You guys are going to love this conversation with Bobby. He is an incredible storyteller. All right, friends, without further ado, get ready to meet Bobby. All right, Bobby, we are live. Welcome to the show, man. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me. Super excited to be with you.
Well, I am equally excited, and I have so many questions for you. You have done so many different interesting things in your career, and when I was thinking about the questions I wanted to prepare for this chat, it was actually really hard because you've dabbled in so many different areas, from development, from working in restaurants, right, to do boutique hotels, and really like everything in between. You've gotten to work for some of the most respected brands in this space. Now you guys are piloting really your own portfolio and growing those into some of the most reputable brands in the industry. So it's just an honor to chat with you, man. And I actually wanted to start the conversation by just hearing a little bit about your story. So you grew up, you were born and raised in New Orleans, which is, one of the most dynamic, interesting, culturally rich cities in the U.S., if not the world. What was it like growing up in New Orleans, and how do you think that shaped the way that you see hospitality today?
Certainly. Well, first off, again, thanks so much for having me. I'm talking to you from New Orleans, and it's the time of year where we would always say like, hey, this is this is our Super Bowl season. This is quite literally our Super Bowl week. So it's a lot of fun to be here. But I grew up here, like you said, and so much of this city and its desire to have people out and about and socializing, I think is really what brought me to hospitality in general. I can think about everything that got me to go on this career path, stems from something simple as when I was a kid, the amount, the attention that my parents put on taking us out to dinner, experiencing different types of restaurants and different versions of hospitality, and simultaneously reiterating the importance of the people working in these industries and what they're doing and creating memories. That was so important to my upbringing in life. I'm sure my parents were probably doing it for a little bit of, let's make sure that we teach them how to behave in public. But what they were probably doing, subconsciously, was just creating this love of being in a social environment where not only was something delicious being presented in front of me, and this goes into everything that we do now that I think about it.
Yeah.
The way I would feel during these experiences is what made me want to always, have the next version. And my mother was a fantastic cook. So it's not like, we went out to dinner because, we didn't eat at home. We ate at home as well. But, multiple times a week, my parents just loved going out to eat. And that really, stoked the flames in me of saying, this is a career path that I think would be really interesting. Even, when I look at what I did for summer jobs or, ways to keep busy, neither of my parents were involved in hospitality, but the first, summer job I had was my dad had me working at a hospital, called a patient escort. And I would wheel people from their room to their car when they were being checked out, or so on and so forth. And that was the first time of, experiencing knocking on a guest door, asking them how they're doing, starting to build that relationship, and, just a different type of hospitality. But again, I think about all these little things now, and of course they all click and make sense. At that time, it was just, this is what my dad was telling me to do, and I was good at it. But as I also look at New Orleans has, to your point, such a unique culture and vibe that leaving New Orleans, even going to any other city, and I spent a lot of time in New York, you get a culture shock of, going from something so unique, has its positives and its negatives, and the positives far outweigh the negatives, but you have this kind of bubble of what people do when they're socializing, how they, go out to eat, what they value, the types of experiences, the type of cuisine, the openness to try new things is what really makes New Orleans incredibly special.
I love that. And I also love that your parents prioritized those experiences. I think, as I've got my own two little kids now, and going out to eat is a freaking adventure, right? And in the truest sense of the word, adventure, right? I think my oldest is 2, and then I have a 10-month-old, and so we last about 30 minutes before shit hits the fan, and so and yet those 30 minutes, we have so many friends who are like, don't want to go out with their kids for, again, all great reasons, and we try to do it when we can. A couple times a month is our goal right now. But it's funny, even as like a 2-year-old and a 10-month-old, you walk into not a super nice restaurant, but not McDonald's either, and it's like my 2-year-old understands that there's something different going on, and he's got to behave, and he sits there. And it's like literally he sits better in restaurants than he does at home. And he's, he loves the people watch, and he loves he's jamming out to the music. And, as long as he's got a little pizza or something, he's good. And it's just funny that even at such a young age, kids can realize this is a different experience. There's something magical going on here. And I have to behave differently. It's funny how even young children realize that.
1,000%. And I'm glad that your 2-year-old behaves in restaurants. Mine are 6 and 5, and they can be animals. But to that point, my kids are like most kids. They eat 4 things. We have a pizza restaurant around the corner from our house. Amazing Northeast style pizza. It's called Z's. Scratches the itch for, the 15 years living in New York and having the best pizza in the world, in my opinion, and getting that there. My son loves it. they love to go there. What they love doing is they love, grabbing one of their coloring sheets, giving it to the person, letting them hang it on the wall. It creates a sense of attachment from a experience perspective. And again, it's a family-friendly restaurant. It's a pizza shop at the end of the day, but it's so pivotal to their excitement of wanting to go there and wanting to be in a place that is more than just the food. It makes them feel. And I think that is when you can create a concept or have a concept that scratches that itch, it creates an everlasting impression. You never forget how you feel. And, talk about, my career. That was one of the mantras that, we used to talk about all the time at USHG is how our guests feel is what they're going to remember.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of USHG, you worked there for a while. Got to work with some of the most incredible restaurateurs and really just hospitality professionals in the world. And I'm just curious, what are some of the lessons that you took away from your experience there? You grew up working in the restaurant industry. You got to work with this incredible, notable group. Now you're doing awesome boutique hotels and restaurants back in New Orleans. But what's like a lesson or two that you learned from your time there that has stuck with you to today?
Yeah. You touched on this when we kicked off, and maybe it was before we started recording or after, but I've been so fortunate in my career to this point that I have had, firsthand boots on the ground experience in so many different types of hospitality, traditional, standalone restaurants, fast casual hotels, stadium and concessions, special events. And, so much of that was thanks to my time at Union Square Hospitality Group. And so when I joined, the first job I had with them is they threw me at Citi Field with the New York Mets and said, "Hey, we need you to run this concession stand."
Wow.
And it was, Citi Field had just opened. It was, right at the time when sports and entertainment venues were really focusing on the fan experience. Little things like the architects were explaining to us, like all of the seats were angled just slightly towards home plate, so that if you were sitting at, on the first baseline, your body wasn't having to turn. You were already kind of turned that way. And so it was so fantastic. They quickly moved me out of the day-to-day operations because they realized my skill set was better suited elsewhere. But, so I wound up, growing my career there, ultimately driving our development team, and concepting, building, managing our real estate portfolio and creating these experiences to hand off to operators. And, I talked to, two things. One is, our job was to create a physical space that, improved and enhanced the emotion that people were going to come in when the team members, who were some of the best in the world, started delivering hospitality to them. And so, Danny Meyer, who was the CEO there, he's now the chairman and just an all around amazing human being, used to say, you want people to feel like they're getting a nice warm hug when they're walking into the space. That can come from obviously their interaction with the maitre d' or with their server. We always took to that as, how can we make this space feel, welcoming and inviting? And that can take it's an approach in many different ways. But also too, we would take it a step further and say, well, how do we make our team members feel welcome and comfortable in this space? And how are we designing something that, improves their working environment? Because if they're happy, they're going to deliver better hospitality to their guests. And if we're listening to them throughout the development period and getting their feedback, we're only going to create a better product.
Yeah.
The other piece that, I still take away to this day, and we talk about this so much here in New Orleans, is whenever we're building or concepting something new, one of our biggest mantras at USHG is we're concepting or we're building something for the community that's there. Because if the community around what we're doing buys in and is excited for it, everybody else will take care of themselves. Tourists will come, out of towners will come, but if the neighborhood and the community and the people who live there haven't bought into it, then we're not hitting the mark in our eyes of success. And that's so critical here. We have a restaurant in Jackson Square in the French Quarter, Anybody who's grown up in New Orleans has taken a field trip to Jackson Square and looked at the historical architecture. And, we're in one of the Pontalba buildings, which are just incredibly historic, beautiful buildings. We have a small little oyster bar there. We started to see this opportunity, and we thought, well, there's how many millions of people traverse Jackson Square every single day, which are great, and it's fantastic that we have such high foot traffic there.
Yeah.
Monday through Wednesday, the people who live in the French Quarter are our regulars. I had no concept until we started working on this project how many people live in the French Quarter. To me, it sounded like how many people live in Times Square. Not many. Obviously, so millions live within a few blocks of that. But the community of the French Quarter is such a vibrant community that is bought into. We're objectively on one of the most tourist traffic, streets of New Orleans, probably after Bourbon Street. We have locals who walk there, who live there, who bring their dogs, who, we know their names. That is, to me, a mark of success. So, wow, we've created this amazing thing that the people of New Orleans are going to. And people who don't go to the French Quarter are going there because they want to be part of this brand and this space.
Yeah, I love that approach. And I actually just want to take a quick step back because, you got to work with Danny Meyer, who is obviously a very renowned restaurateur and really just hospitality entrepreneur, full stop. And one of the things that, at least how I first heard about him, was through the Shake Shack story, which I think is just one of the many things that he's done. But like I was thinking about this the other day when I took we actually didn't go to it. We ended up not going to Shake Shack, but we walked by a Shake Shack, and you can just tell that it just feels so different from, and I obviously have eaten there before, but it feels so different from any other like fast casual establishment, from like the signage to when you walk in, to the flow, to the line. Literally everything about the experience feels way nicer than it should, given that it's serving burgers and fries. And so I'm curious, that ethos obviously stems, I would imagine, from Danny himself. Were there one or two practical things that you learned about how he thinks about experience design, and or just how the leadership thinks about experience design, that you have taken into your work today?
I mean, I think, so it's funny because Shake Shack when I first started working at USHG, there were two.
Okay. Wow.
My wife opened the second Shake Shack.
No way.
For Shake Shack for almost 10 years. We didn't know each other at that time. It was just happenstance that we worked at the same company. So, I mean, Shake Shack has an immense place in our hearts because, it was what launched my wife's career.
Yeah.
What Shake Shack did incredibly well that I take with me is, as they started to scale and grow, and you mentioned this, no Shake Shack was designed the same, but they all had, you knew immediately it was the brand. They were able to create this concept that no matter where you walked in, whether it's, one in West Hollywood, which was completely different from, the original in Madison Square Park, you knew immediately it was a Shake Shack. And the design had a lot to do with it. The brand is, incredibly strong. But I'm going to also take it a step further, is the focus that they put on the team members. So when you're ordering, it feels so different from when you're ordering at another, fast casual or traditional fast food burger joint. And that to me was, such a crazy piece of it. I mean, I remember, my first summers, being in New York, and, Shake Shack had the original. They used to have the Shack Cam. And it was a marketing ploy, but it was so brilliant. We talked about this literally last week in regards to another project, is, people would check the camera to see how long the line was. And then, people would run down when the line was, short enough so they didn't have to wait 45 minutes, which I did multiple times for it. They created, through the strong brand, through strong design, through amazing hospitality. Danny used to use this term later on when we were working on another project, is, it became an essential part of people's lives. It had essentiality. And so, what would you do in a world without Shake Shack? It's hard for people to imagine. It is so ingrained in our industry and what it means to have a fast casual, cuisine done with high quality ingredients done with integrity, with a focus on the employee experience and giving back to their communities. I mean, they pioneered so much of this at scale.
Yeah.
And I think that's what has been, so incredible to watch them see. And, we have Shake Shacks in New Orleans now. It's incredible to see. And obviously that's probably not news anymore. God knows how many hundreds they have. But it's incredible seeing what that brand has become in the last, 20 years.
It's got to be so surreal too, just walking down the street and seeing one and then realizing like that's been an instrumental part in your family's story.
Yeah.
That's got to that's so such a testament, quite frankly, to all the work that you guys did to bring that to life. As you started developing boutique hotels,
Mm-hmm.
what were some of these principles that you brought into this adjacent category? Obviously, F&B is different from a hotel. They're very related in many ways. I think some of the best restaurants I've ever been to feel like a boutique hotel experience, and then vice versa. So talk to me a little bit about the Hotel Henrietta and the columns and some of the projects that you guys have worked on at Sandstone. And then what are some of the underlying principles that you guys take to development, to staffing, to branding, any sort of lessons learned along the way of how to design these truly memorable experiences, especially in a city like New Orleans, which has a lot of choice. It's got like consumers come to New Orleans expecting an experience, right? And maybe more so than in other cities. So how do you sort of capitalize on that? Any sort of lessons you've learned in experience design as you've stepped into the boutique hotel development space?
Yeah, so much. And, at Sandstone, our flagship property, the Columns Hotel, has been an institution in New Orleans for the last, almost 40 years. A very old mansion, 1800s on St. Charles Avenue, built by a tobacco magnate, from a historic architect, Thomas Sully. It means so much to so many people here in New Orleans. And when, Sandstone acquired the property at the end of 2019, we acquired a property that had not changed for a long time. And what worked, in the early 90s and in 80s was still what was there in 2019. And, service and hospitality were, not where we thought they could be, but, even what was from a product perspective could be enhanced and updated to deliver a new version of that. And so Jason Seidman, who's our CEO and just, an amazing creative leader, and also has a fantastic, story himself, was able to see, okay, great, with, improvements to the interior design, with changing of materials, with improvement to FF&E, with painting, repainting walls, changing out light fixtures, making it feel less dated and more grand without renovating an entire space, allowed us to do a number of different things. One, we reintroduced from a brand perspective with new brand identity what the Columns was. We took it from dive bar inside of a beautiful old mansion to an amazing boutique hospitality experience with a culinary and beverage product that matched the grandeur of where you were, sitting, in a beautiful mansion looking out at the streetcar on St. Charles Avenue. We spent so much time and effort trying to refine that, bringing in, culinary experts, bringing in beverage experts to say, we're not afraid to push to a higher tier product, because guess what? People coming to New Orleans expect a certain level of culinary, a certain level of cocktail experience. And we want to exceed those expectations. So often it's a don't meet your heroes concept. You build it up so much in your mind, and then you get there and you're not getting the, what you would hope. We wanted to knock that out of the water. And so with the Columns, it is architecturally, spatially, exactly how it's been. We didn't change anything except for we, for lack of a better term, spruced it up. And we did so in a really unique and creative way that gave you a sense of place, but also gave us stories to tell. So much of the FF&E that we brought in was not like you're building a new hotel and you go to a designer and then have furniture produced in a factory and shipped and it's all homogenous and the same. we were buying at auction furniture from the old Ritz-Carlton, furniture from the Gramercy Park Hotel, furniture that has seen a lifetime of stories and has a history, and incorporating pieces throughout the property that obviously felt like they belonged and had, always been there, but gave the property it enhanced its story and what it meant and felt when you walked in. We had artists come in from around the world, paint our walls and texture them to make them new, but look weathered, look like you were walking into this grand, space. We pulled back, rugs, had them cleaned, but also found beautiful, historic wood flooring, cleaned that up, and, got in removing rugs, got rid of a lot of smells that come with old hospitality businesses, and just really completely transformed it. Landscaping, massive at the Columns to entering this experience. New Orleans is, a very Caribbean city when you think about where we are, especially from a landscape perspective. So you see this beautiful white mansion with a massive porch and obviously columns. But you walk through this amazing jungle type experience in a patio with, seating everywhere, fire pits in the winter, guests socializing, drinking, eating. And then you walk into a space with a grand hallway. It's a little bit dark. It's a little bit sexy. But it's also, a place that you feel, wow, this is what New Orleans means in so many different facets. And then when we took that and built a sister property 2 blocks down the road with Hotel Henrietta, we didn't have an old building. We had a piece of land. And, the lesson there was, with our architects, designers, and consultants is how do you build something along St. Charles Avenue, which there hadn't been a new hotel built on St. Charles Avenue in, 30 plus years. We were the first. How do you build something that feels like it belongs on a historic street?
Yeah.
And, not going the Disneyland route of building something that looks old. And the reality is there was probably a 99%, fail rate at doing that. It's an incredibly tough task, but our architects, in my opinion, nailed it, because when we get, guests coming in and say, what was this before? This has always been here, right? And we're like, no, this has been here for 7 months now. That's the indication of like, of course this building's here. Of course this building belongs here. What else would it be? But in the same token, when we look at the interior design, we looked at, curating a product for a specific type of traveler to enhance our overall experience. What did that mean from a design perspective? And it had to be different from the Columns because it wasn't 150 years old. And so using things like art, using things like smells, linens, soft goods, amenities, just making sure that all of those items have a thoughtfulness to them that improve the overall guest experience, either consciously or subconsciously. Almost all of our properties were such a big proponent of, little things like coffee. Coffee is a critical part to our guest experience at our hotel. So much so that when you walk into Hotel Henrietta, the first thing you'll see, aside from, many things, is a beautiful pink espresso machine that blends in perfectly to that because, aside from the fact that we want to make sure that everybody has really, really good coffee and doesn't have to sacrifice there, it is part of the experience. We want people to engage, be eating and drinking, be able to get a cocktail, be able to have a question about their room, get some information about the city. It is that hospitality starts everywhere and is consistent across the board. Whether I'm speaking to a front desk agent or whether I'm speaking to a barista, it's all one experience, and we want to show that to our guests, from the onset.
Yeah. You said so many incredible things there, Bobby, and two in particular that stand out. I've got a friend, Hans Lori, who does a bunch of incredible content on Instagram. He's sort of exploded as this like great design strategist and interior design resource. And I was actually at an event with him in LA a couple weeks ago. We were on a panel together, and I was asking Hans specifically about, hey, what are some design practices that you think in the boutique hotel space are either overdone or underdone? Like, where's their opportunity? to be truly different, right? And his response, which I loved, was like, so many people go into a property and or have a piece of land and they're going to develop something and they dictate like, this is the story I want to tell here. And he said, in actuality, according to him, right, like the best design comes from the story that the place is already telling. So when you were talking about the columns and trying to figure out, okay, how do you breathe new life into this without just making it some beautiful, like modern, maybe you kept the exterior the same, but like you walk inside and everything feels like, it's 2025. And Hans is like, so many people take that approach these days and you sort of lose like the soul of the property. Whereas like if you go in and you just spend a lot of time in a space and you ask yourself like, what is the story the space is telling me? Not this is the story I want the space to tell me. You end up yielding like a much better product. And if you do the former rather than the latter, the consumer, the traveler, like notices it or it feels a little disingenuous.
Yeah.
And so I loved what you said both about, right, the columns and then also a new build like Hotel Henrietta, but the first new build on St. Charles Avenue and God knows how long. I mean, talk about like immense pressure in both categories, in both areas, in both instances. And yet it seems like you guys were able to really lean into and it'd be incredibly thoughtful on like, what is the story that the place is telling? What is the story that the land is telling? What is the story that the neighborhood is telling? And how do we help augment the story rather than write a new book? And I think that the folks that can do that well are the folks that, to your point, end up winning, and consumers and travelers think that this space has always been there. Is there an approach that you like better and or that you find more enjoyable? Like, do you like a columns project where you've got some very clear restraints and constraints rather that you can play with, or do you like sort of the ground up build where anything is possible?
Yes, it's a great question. I don't know if I have a favorite. Being that we're in New Orleans, we've done more historic renovations than we have ground up builds. I think it's what gets me excited about a project is the project itself. And I know that's, kind of an easy answer, but doing something that doesn't exist, creating something that doesn't exist so that we feel like there is a need for it. I buy into that when we start projects. And I really, try to embody and, tout, both to our consultant teams and our contractors, but also to our operations team who's going to be running it, after we've brought this thing to life, really trying to push the why behind it and have my excitement be as infectious as it can be for, our team members and for our guests coming in. I mentioned our oyster bar in the French Quarter called Fives. Fives is an oyster bar that, pulls on the heartstrings of a lot of us who used to live in New York and used to go to a place called Maison Premier. And we loved it. And we're in a city with incredible seafood, incredible oysters that we wanted to, tip our hat to that and make it our own. It's called Fives because the original owner of the columns was a tobacco magnate. And what they used to call, cigarettes or a pack of cigarettes or a cigarette were fives because they cost 5 cents. And so there's subtle branding nods. And that's where I think, to your point earlier about like telling the story, I think telling the story is incredibly important. Knowing where to be creative and whimsical with the story and then letting the space tell the story of history and of itself is something that, to our horn, I think we've done incredibly well with. But I love that. And we hire, team members who are able to really distill what this is. We could have called that bar anything.
Yeah.
But the fact that, to me, trying to create the connectivity and that allows us to do a number of different things, and, you and I have talked about this, at other times, aligning brands together. When you're creating a portfolio of companies, it's not just, we have this concept and this concept and this concept. When they're all intertwined, so you have, your sales team has so much more story to tell to a client to get them excited about why they want to have their wedding at the columns and where they should be doing their, welcome drinks and so on and so forth. When we have, our front desk team saying, hey, what should I do? And be like, oh, well, you could, grab a coffee at this property next door. And then, oh, hey, by the way, there's our pickleball facility down the road, which, has a similar F&B program that doesn't really feel with what you would think of a pickleball facility. But of course, when you get there, it feels obviously, what else would it be? And then you're moving down to the French Quarter. And I love being able to navigate that, being able to paint a picture of what the guest experience could look like, but then letting the spaces and the hospitality write the story in the guest's mind.
Yeah. What's so cool about that is you see folks sort of force the connection sometimes, right? And you guys could have done, the Columns Bar or the Columns Oyster Bar or something like that. Or yet
that's what it says on our lease, but
I love it.
Columns Bar. I just laugh about that.
No, but there's so much beauty in being able to like be subtle with the connection, so much more power. And then, right, it becomes the story that everyone who's at Fives, right, wants to then go tell their friends, oh, did you know that the reason this is called Fives is because of its connection to, the columns? And like, it's organic. People love story. People love distilling new information or information that they think is on the inside to their friends. And if you can make that easier to tell and more exciting to tell, then it's the best word of mouth marketing that you could possibly conjure up. And being able to execute it in the way that you guys have is just very tactful. It's very creative. It's craftsman-like, which I appreciate a lot.
And thank you. And I think we're lucky in so much as that Jason has an incredible talent of creating and manifesting what the experience and what we want it to be in the spaces that we're giving, and painting the right amount, knowing when to stop. And then our operations team has again, of course, I'm going to be the biggest cheerleader of our team, but I do feel incredibly strongly about this. The culture that we've created around the brands and the stories and the presence, everybody's excited to deliver that hospitality and share those anecdotes and and take the storytelling with the guests to a certain point if that's what the guest is looking for. And it makes our team's lives easier because we're arming them with great information, but also it allows for those organic hospitality moments to come about. And that, I think, is crucial in our success, especially in the boutique hotel space, is those organic moments of hospitality create what we were talking about earlier, create those memories. And that's what people are going to take home. When they forget what color the wall was painted or, what the linens felt like, they're going to remember, how they felt when they, during their stay with us.
Yeah. I'd love to get your thoughts on F&B concepts because, again, your roots are in restaurants. And so a lot of the folks who are listening to this podcast, they've built really cool experiential stays, right? Maybe they've built these awesome cabins in the woods. Yep. They've built out these mini micro resorts. Some of them are now interested in and actually actively building from the ground up their first boutique hotels and everyone in between. But one of the things that's very, very difficult, at least from the people that I've talked to, who've built these very experiential stays, is trying to figure out like F&B. Some of these are in the middle of the woods, right? Some of these are not in they're outside of metro areas, and that's kind of the beauty of them. But there's this growing trend of folks wanting to build these beautiful micro resorts, these landscape hotels, even urban boutiques, and trying to figure out how to make F&B work in their location. I know that this is kind of a big question and there are a zillion factors here, but Bobby, when you think about crafting an F&B concept that pairs neatly with a hotel concept or a micro resort concept, what are some like broad stroke things that you would ensure are in place, or how should folks go about thinking through how to bring something like this to life in a way that feels continuous, with the brand of the state that they built? You guys have done this so well. So what are some words of encouragement or takeaways you've learned from your projects that you could bestow upon listeners?
Well, and on top of that too, because we look at projects all the time, and when obviously there's a hurdle that we have to jump with our own projects too, is, let's be honest, food and beverage is really hard to do.
Yeah.
It's really expensive from a labor and from a cost of goods perspective. And it is, you have to nail it consistently in order to build that. And so, all of those really, really hard things aside, and needing to make sure that the numbers work for whatever the model is, and especially in the boutique hotel space where you don't have 1,000 rooms of captive audience to, supply this. Some of the things that we look for that we have found successful is, we try to not be afraid to stray away from traditional. So at the Columns, for example, and the Columns, albeit had a robust food and beverage business, we have now, almost tripled it from what it was in 2019. And the reason being is, amongst many things, is there's no formal dining room at the Columns. There are sitting rooms. There's the patio. There's, the sitting by the fireplace. There's a room called the chapel room because of the stained glass. We allow our guests to consume food and beverage wherever they want in the property. Wow. And so, that has its amazing pros is, I'm here. I don't have to get up. I can have an amazing meal. I can grab my cocktail. Someone will bring it to me. Those hospitality moments are there. We don't, the potential downfalls, but I think, not a thing at the Columns is you may not have the same energy that a large, New York City dining room has, but you have energy flowing from other things. At, our property in San Antonio, the Ranch Motel, we took an old motel and, and turned it into a boutique hotel experience. But at the end of the day, there is no, main hub or main interior space. So our front desk agent checking guests in or being the place where guests are interacting the most, that's an opportunity for us from an F&B perspective, whether that's curating an amazing grab and go fridge or, partnering with local artisans and vendors to, do pop-ups to supplement our food and beverage program. I think the crux of it is that you have to be creative to find what works for the property. And if you have a property and then want an amazing restaurant with it, those two things may not always be the right thing. A full service 3 meal a day restaurant that works in a 1,000-room city center hotel is probably not going to be the right, outlet in far west Texas. And so finding the right concept for the experience is critical. We talked about, people with cabins or things like that, maybe take food and beverage away from, hey, let's build a restaurant, to a, hey, how can we curate, a beautiful stock pantry? How can we say, hey, when you check in, your fridge is filled with not only, incredible food from whatever the local community. So that's expense from an overhead perspective that you're not bearing, but also what are some unique, having high-end cocktails or just thoughtful ingredients throughout the way so that guests, again, feel, wow, this is incredible. And again, that's where food and beverage is in a lot of hotel environments is adding to the overall experience. Obviously it needs to make money or needs to make financial sense. That's a given, but adding to the overall experience of keeping guests on property, food and beverage plays such a critical role to that.
Yeah.
At our property, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say at our property, Hotel Henrietta, which is 3 blocks away from the Columns, we didn't build a full service kitchen. We built an amazing coffee bar because we know the demand is there. We partnered through a licensing agreement with a local bagel shop, which has fantastic product. And again, too, pulling on, we subconsciously probably have, issues with our love affair with New York because we're like, oh, let's put a bagel shop here. Let's, I love my New York pizza. Like we probably have to fix those issues, but we partner with that. We have a small, pantry style menu. But if guests are looking for a more robust dinner, we're pushing them to the Columns. But if you want, a really lovely sandwich, a really amazing bagel, a great cappuccino, an amazing cocktail to sit, in the lobby while you're just relaxing, we have that there. It's pared down and it's fit for purpose because we didn't want to build, a 2,500 square foot vented kitchen with all the ancillary back of house and the overhead that came with it, it didn't fit that model, both the concept of the hotel and the financials of the business model.
Yeah. It reminds me of this property that I was at relatively recently called Dawn Ranch in Guerneville, California, and it's like Sonoma County. It's just like an absolutely stunning like property, and they've got like a lodge, and they do have like a incredible like full service dinner
Mm-hmm.
and incredible kitchen there. But like during the day, right? They have this beautiful little collection of local pastries and just amazing coffee, and like that's the offering. But everything that they offer, right, for until dinner service, right? So during that for the first part of the day, every the quality of the product that they're offering, it's small, but it's so good. So you've got like three options, right? Of like,
Right.
do you want a bagel? Do you want like a croissant? Do you want a sweet pastry? But all three are executed perfectly, so like you can get whichever one you want, and you're satisfied. Like I think the consumer is used to, at least in America, like we're used to like choice, right? Like we love our massive menus, right? And yet it's funny how when it is pared down but executed well, everyone's happy, and you forget that you could have needed or you could have wanted more. So I love that you guys have sort of really been thoughtful with what does the experience call for, how do we deliver on that, and then how do we, of course, have a way to refer guests to a more full service experience if that's what they're looking for. But the other question I was going to ask you, Bobby, was I remember like growing up, and not that we stayed in like the most amazing hotels at all, and I come from a big family, so we were often not staying in the most amazing hotels. But even like as I started traveling as a younger guy with a little bit of disposable income, I feel like the hotels that we went to maybe like a decade ago, oftentimes the restaurant that was paired with them was not necessarily like the best place to go around town, and oftentimes it like wasn't even that good, right? And I just got back from staying at a JW Marriott in downtown LA, and like the restaurant was horrible. Like it was, and this is 1,000 key, or maybe it was like 800, whatever. It was a massive hotel, right? And the F&B program was awful. And
Well, it's funny
so
because think about historically, where did the great chefs of the world, in Europe and other places, like it was hotels. Like that's where they grew up. And to your point, yeah, it wasn't like that. It hasn't been like that for a while.
And so I guess that's my question, is like that was my understanding as well, and then it felt like for I don't know how long it hasn't been the case, but now I feel like there's this resurgence
Yeah.
happening, and it seems to be happening in the boutique space, like the restaurants and the bars and the coffee shops that are connected to these boutique independent properties. Though I mean, those do seem like the best places in town. We just got back from this incredible little boutique hotel in Toronto called the Annex Hotel, and like literally like we went to a bunch of different places around. Their like bar and like their coffee shop setup was our favorite place that we went to, right? And so, I like, can you muse on that for a while? Is there sort of a renaissance happening? Has it always been there, but just wasn't as mainstream as it is now, or how do you think about that?
I think in the boutique space, it, it's definitely probably a little bit more mainstream because I
Yeah,
think it's always been there, at least with properties that are good, that are thoughtful. We
yeah,
use that word a lot, but it's so critical in the boutique space because, you know, going back to the columns, it's a 150-year-old building. In the summertime, it's hot. In the
yeah,
wintertime, it's cold. We have air conditioning and heat, but there's only so much that you can do with these old buildings. You're wanting to stay in this experience because you value everything else around it. If you just needed a commodity place to stay, there's options for that. And so I think from a food and beverage perspective, places that have a thoughtfulness to them, it's always been there. But I also think it's objectively a little bit easier for boutique operators, boutique property owners to write their own rule book. When
mm,
you look at some of these larger flags, and again, with no disrespect to them, it's very difficult to move those ships and do something different, especially when you have brand standards that need to be abided to, and you have certain loyalty programs that are very rigid. You have to do something for the sake of doing it, not necessarily because it's the right thing to do. That's a challenging environment to deliver a high quality, consistent product over and over again. I do think it's getting better though, and you
yeah,
can look to larger properties and larger flags that have put an emphasis on this because they know that that's what travelers and guests are looking for right now. But for a small, restaurant operator to go partner and do either a management agreement or a licensing agreement with a large hotel is a lot more challenging than them to do the same thing with a smaller hotel. Knowing the owner of the property, knowing a lot of times owner operators, being able to collaborate and make changes on the fly and be more responsive and nimble to guest needs versus, having to spend 8 months negotiating a 200-page contract with the food and beverage operator who is also the chef and also the maitre d' and does the accounting and pays, payroll. So the boutique space is, in my opinion, able to navigate those fields much more nimbly. And again, it's not to say that the big properties can't do it and aren't doing it, but it's a lot more challenging for them to do it. And it's also probably a lot more expensive just given what they have to build out for it. We can do so much with such a little space because of the size of our properties. When you start getting up to 1,000 room property, you have, multiple kitchens, you have an in-room dining kitchen, you have a banquets kitchen, you have the restaurant kitchen. Each one needs their own team of chefs. You're adding so much dollar to it that at a certain point, somebody's going to throw the flag and say, hey, we need to make a change. And in order to maintain the brand standard, we can't reduce hours of operation. So we're going to have to do things differently elsewhere. And, unfortunately, sometimes that comes at the expense of quality or maybe not even quality, but the ability to be nimble and change on the fly because you have purchasing agreements in place or so on and so forth. And look, that's all great. And it works for them, but you definitely see them trying. And I think it's, great that they are, because that only improves, us. We're big believers that all ships rise with the tide. And so if the local large flagged hotels are doing well, we're going to be doing well side by side with them.
Yeah, very, very well said. My last question for you, Bobby, we could talk about so many things. I'll have to just have you back on the show because there's so many other questions I have for you. But for the sake of time here, I want to just hear, are there markets that you are paying attention to and that you're thinking through that you think are ripe for boutique operators, boutique developers to sort of venture into? Maybe sort of markets that are less expected, or they could be more expected too, but just any markets come to mind that you think folks who are interested in building a first concept or maybe a second or third concept should be looking at?
Yeah, I mean, so many. I can tell you a couple that we have been kind of exploring over the last 6 months, either proactively or just organically. But we think that there is a lot of potential there. We part of the Texas is one, and Texas is a massive state. I completely appreciate that. We have a property in San Antonio, so all the area surrounding San Antonio, is really interesting to us. Of course, San Antonio proper, but San Antonio proper is massive with tons of money and tons of development. You start going out to like Bernie and some of the other markets, there's a lot of cool things happening out there. And again, San Antonio has a vibe, a lot like New Orleans. People from San Antonio were very proud. You start looking at markets like even Galveston, super cool, lots of old historic properties that could use a facelift and a refresh. But then also, I was speaking with a hotel developer who I've known for a couple of years and just incredible creative, incredible visionary in doing properties in the Raleigh-Durham area, but now starting to get into like Greenville, South Carolina, and some of these other places. Like, so cool what they're doing there. And from a concepting perspective in the boutique space, a little bit larger than us, kind of 150 key plus, but it is a market that isn't oversaturated with this type of product. As much as I love New Orleans and, we'll continue, to grow here, we're probably not going to be building as much from a real estate perspective because, we don't want to be, from a risk perspective, we don't want to be overexposed, but also too, we want to make sure that everything we're doing goes back to, can tick all the boxes that we've talked about over the last, hour or so.
Yeah.
Those are some of the markets that, we've been looking at, other markets, along the Gulf Coast, Baton Rouge, other, Lafayette, other cool places in Louisiana. and moving into Mississippi and Alabama, there's tons of really interesting and historic places. A lot of people are activating in Huntsville right now. There's a ton of industry going there, and thus is going to need for hospitality products. And it's a historic. They have a little historic downtown. So yeah, I mean, those are just a couple that we're looking at. Obviously, kind of local to the southeast because that's where we are, and that's what we see a lot more of. But yeah, I mean, the cool part about boutique hotels is with the right location and the right concept, the demand is there. And again, the size of our properties, at least our properties at Sandstone, make it so that you know the economics of it are I don't want to say easy because they're far from easy, but they're more achievable. I feel like with a 20 to 40 room property, the growth in overhead and maintenance and all of the less sexy stuff that we've talked about isn't substantially larger until you start getting into those larger properties where then you start having significantly more overhead and cost with it. We found a sweet spot in this 20 to 40 room sector, which we love being in. And we know we can scale it. We know we can grow it. We know how to operate it. We know the teams that we need to put in place with it. And so that's a lot of, from a market perspective, not necessarily like a place, but from a concept, we're super eager with that size of project.
Yeah. Well, and what's so amazing about that is that, there are so many markets that are maybe, I don't know, second or third tier markets, depending on how you think about them, but like that have the Hampton Inns, right? And the Holiday Inns and then like nothing else. And consumers are going there, right? People are traveling there. They're a little bit off the beaten path, right? Or whatever, but there's more demand for that than ever before. I even just think about, corporate offsites and more of specifically like smaller startups and just people that like I know in my circles, they're all looking for places to like bring their team. When you're a small company, like you don't necessarily, you want to put them in a really cool, amazing spot, but going to New York or New Orleans, like proper, like it's very expensive. So if you can create an incredible experience in and of itself in sort of these second or third tier markets that are still exciting and dynamic, and there's great like restaurants and life to them, it actually seems more exclusive in some respects because it's like, oh yeah, like I haven't been to Greenville, South Carolina. Like what is there? Like I don't know. Like I'm like interested in discovering the spot. And so when the only thing there are the big chains, it provides an even extra special experience because even if you're not staying at whatever hotel concept that you've developed there, chances are you're probably going, the consumer's probably going to your restaurant or to your coffee shop or to your bar because it's going to be one of, if not the coolest things in town. And so I get really excited and bullish on people who are looking at these other markets because I've been to many of them. A lot of my friends in the unique stay space have developed these incredible one of a kind escapes in like the Texas Hill Country, for instance, right? But there's like there's like one now that just opened up, but like there's no like great boutique hotel in the market. Yeah. Like there's the roadside inns, and then there's these incredible like one of a kind tree houses, but there's no like boutique hotel. And so you go to some of these markets and you're like, like this seems like a great opportunity. Where are the developers? So it's exciting to hear that you guys are thinking about this and focused on, bringing some of these new or other markets to life in a really new and dynamic way.
Yeah, it's honestly the part that gets us out of bed in the morning is being able to be on the forefront and driving these unique experiences. So we're really excited for the boutique hotel space and kind of what it has, and we're gonna be thoughtful in how we grow, but it's so liberating to be able to have these really unique different types of hospitality experiences and meeting the guests and people who are driven to travel with these experiences. It's a really, really fun space to be in right now.
Yeah. Well, Bobby, thank you so much for your time. And for our listeners, I'll have links to all of your projects in the show notes below, links to the Sandstone website, link to your LinkedIn as well, Bobby. Anywhere else you'd want to send folks to besides your LinkedIn, Sandstone website, websites of your hotels, anywhere else folks should check out?
No, when you're in New Orleans or San Antonio, come check out our properties and come say hi. We'd love to see you and have a cocktail.
Wonderful, man. Hey, thanks so much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Zach. Talk soon.
Hey friends, thanks for joining us for this episode of Behind the Stays. I'd love to know what you thought of the episode. Feel free to shoot me a DM on Instagram at Behind the Stays or send me an email at zach@joinjourney.com. If this is your first time tuning in, it's a pleasure to have you and we hope to have you back again soon. But if you've been a listener for a while, I'd greatly appreciate if you'd subscribe to the show if you aren't already, and then leave us a rating and review of the show wherever you're streaming this podcast. Oh, and if you know a hotelier or a hospitality entrepreneur that's building something new and novel, I invite you to introduce them to me so that my team and I can discuss bringing them on the show. Again, you can just shoot me an email at zach@joinjourney.com or a DM on Instagram. Behind the Scenes is brought to you by Journey, a next-generation loyalty program built for the modern traveler. We're looking to onboard new boutique hotels, unique stays, and the top vacation rental management companies onto our platform every day. If you're a hospitality entrepreneur who has a stay or a collection of stays with soul, we'd love for you to apply to join our alliance at joinjourney.com/alliance. Again, that's joinjourney.com/alliance. Thanks for being here, y'all. We will see you next time.